Welcome friends, come on in. Let's explore where truth begins. Here inside, shining bright, wisdom grows as we unite. Let's open doors to heart and mind. Let's shine the light.
Hi, this is Susan Pitcairn and
Richard Pitcairn.
welcome to our show, Open Doors, where together we explore the mysteries of life and what it is to live in freedom. If you enjoy this kind of content, please like and subscribe. Thanks. And now for today's show. This is Susan Pitcairn, and this is...
Richard Pitcairn.
And we wanted to share a little bit of thoughts today about how to have a good conversation, whether it's between two people or in a group.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Okay? And, you know, we don't always have perfect conversations. No, we don't. But, you know, there's different kinds of conversations. There's just chatty things, and then there's serious heart-to-heart talks, you know, and then there's just kind of open explorations.
Yeah, and one of the things that's, difficult oftentimes is people just start talking about themselves. It's not really a conversation. They're just giving you a story.
Yeah.
And that's not so fun.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem that I find, probably most people find, when they're in company with other people, is when somebody just wants to start talking about themselves and not a good listener.
Yeah.
You know, and then, you know, some people are really skilled listeners, but then they're not so good at sharing from themselves. So it seems like a really good conversation is when you have that back and forth.
Yeah, they'll say they may go on at some length until talking about themselves until you're really getting pretty tired of it, and then they'll catch on to that a little bit and they'll say, "Well, that's enough about me. What do you think of me?"
Yeah, well, they don't really say that, but that's a good joke. But yeah, it's like, but it seems like just the art of give and take is really what makes a good conversation, is where you just kind of, sense that somebody's, I mean, it's okay to interrupt a little bit, but not too much, right? Just kind of back and forth.
So what do you think, what is your feeling about the quality of that interaction?
It feels like it flows. It goes back and forth. It doesn't feel, egoic particularly. It feels like you're just kind of on the same page and you're just exploring together openly. It's not about your story and my story and ego stuff, and also, like when we first met, I mean, I think one of the things that struck me was I felt like I could say anything to you, just kind of like I don't have to pretend to be a certain way. That's really important, actually. Really important.
Yeah, and I think another thing is, and we can all notice this ourselves, is that it is not unusual that you can be having a conversation with somebody and at the same time in your mind you're thinking of all the objections or criticisms or responses you can make to them,
right,
as compared to just listening quietly.
Right.
And when you listen quietly, I think there's more of a melding of minds, don't you?
Yeah.
You're more fully in touch with each other.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I think that's important, and that's something we don't really particularly practice, but I think once you catch on to that, you can sort of just practice listening to people with an attentive, quiet mind, and you pick up a lot of things. You learn a lot more.
Sure, and it helps to have, also, I think, sort of another point, sometimes it helps to have a good topic, like this topic right here is a good one. Whereas if we were just sort of chatting and gossiping about people, or what the house looks like across the street, or things like that, it's not really that interesting a conversation. But if you're talking about something that involves life, feelings, what's important, becoming more enlightened, growing as a human being in some way, learning about stuff.
Exploring.
Yeah.
Or inquiring.
Yeah. And a lot of it does come down to, doesn't it, like to visual signals. So like if you are talking with someone and, I think some people aren't paying that close of attention to whether or not they're being really appreciated or listened to. So you know how it is sometimes when there are people that just will go on and on, or will say something that's kind of disruptive, like you takes it in a whole different direction or something, and you're kind of going, your mind's kind of glazing over a little bit, and you're kind of looking away, and they don't pick up those signals. And I don't really actually totally understand why that is the case. They're maybe too wrapped up in what they're
I
saying.
don't know either. I'm assuming they're wrapped up, that they're really paying attention to what they're saying, probably. I think if I were doing that, if I'm in that state, I probably wouldn't notice either. You know what I mean? It's like I'm caught up in what I'm saying. I'm all excited and thinking about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's...
Yeah, that probably happens to me sometimes. I get on one of my favorite topics and I start giving a little lecture on it or something. You know, wow, did you hear the latest about this really fascinating thing that I read years ago? You know, something like that. So
It's not a when you're in that state and you're expounding, it's not really a sharing.
But sometimes I feel like it can be interesting though. Like if someone's really interested in a certain topic, and you can feel it's more of a feeling, right? When it's going back and forth about it. The nice birdies up there. They're having a conversation.
Yeah. They're discussing whether that's a good place for a nest.
I don't know what they're discussing, but it's beautiful. Another type of conversation that seems important to have sometimes, especially as a couple, or you know, maybe with a parent-child situation or close friends, would be what's called the heart-to-heart conversation. And like when I studied counseling, one of the things they recommended, like when you're in kind of an impasse, you know, when somebody's mad at somebody else, say, or you know, or you're kind of having like an argument or a disagreement or something, it can be really helpful to sit next to each other, you know, maybe hold hands or something like that, and put on a timer and just go, we've done this, you know, we haven't done it that much for a while, we haven't seemed like we've needed to, but like 3 minutes for you, 3 minutes for me, and whoever,
without interruption.
Yeah, and no interruption at all, and whoever is the most upset is usually the one that should go first, so they feel heard.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and then often in that kind of a conversation, it comes to a deeper level. Like you might start out like, well, I'm pissed at you because you did X, Y, Z, and then it goes more to a heartfelt thing, like actually I'm really afraid that you're going to you know, leave me or something like that, you know, would come out but you know, I really appreciate da 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 da. So it's like there's that. Yeah. Another thing that I just kind of a little formula back in my days of studying counseling and you know, group therapy and communication and stuff, sometime like about 30 years ago. I remember there was kind of a formula. Like, this is another topic, but when you have a conversation where it's a difficult conversation, and you kind of want to confront someone with a bad habit in your mind that they do, that you want to try to correct or get them to change something. Yeah. And it's kind of hard to say it because you don't want to be insulting and you don't want to lose the relationship. Right. Okay, so like a kind of a general formula that they have for that I think works probably is to keep it, you know, first of all in I language more so. So you'd say something like, when you do X, Y, Z, I feel A, B, C. And that makes me want to, you know, da 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 da, maybe pull further away from you. And I don't really want to do that. And
have you ever used that?
Yeah. And if you would, and then you put in a request, like you say something like, and if you're willing, I would appreciate it if you would, you know, make the change, whatever. Like if you would say interrupt less, or if you would say listen to me more, or if let's say you would you know, help with the dishes, or whatever it would be, you know, that you're trying to get request. So but it always starts with that, like, you know, when you do this thing, like when you don't ever help you don't exaggerate, when you don't clean up after dinner, and I've done a lot of work and I'm tired, sometimes I feel a little resentful, and I don't really want to feel that way about you because I love you. And so you know, what would really help, what I appreciate would be if you just kind of ask more, you know, pay attention more to how I'm feeling, and then maybe, you know, see if pitch in there and do that. something like that. So there's always this kind of, it's like a little bit of a negotiation at the end.
Yeah.
So it's not like, God damn it, why don't you ever clean up, you know? Like things like that, you know. Those
Yeah.
are the kind of, you know, habits that, especially if we saw our parents talking that way, you know, we're more likely to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can see the difference there.
Another thing, and this is one in small groups, I have a little difficulty knowing how to deal with. Maybe you have some thoughts on it.
Small groups.
Yeah.
Like,
Small-
what small do you?
Like
2 or 3?
like a potluck group or
Like-
something like that. A social group of,
Maybe 20 or so?
yeah, you know, of 10 to 20 people, something
Okay,
like that, that
uh-huh.
maybe meets regularly, or as a
Right.
support group or something
Okay.
like that. So let's say, I mean, there's often a tendency in a group like that for 1, 2, maybe 3 people to sort of do most of the talking, to kind of dominate, or to go on and on for a while about the same thing without really contributing, or
Yeah.
sometimes to interrupt and take the conversation in a whole different sideways
Right,
direction that
right.
is kind of all about, well, here's how I
Yeah.
feel, you know, instead of like listening to the
Yeah.
other person.
It's hard to manage that.
So I have noticed that you do a good job, you know, when we've had that situation kind of come up, of facilitating, meaning like, you know, well, we haven't heard from so-and-so,
Oh,
you know,
uh-huh.
that's nice, you know, maybe I think it probably helps to appreciate what the person saying at some level. Well, that's nice to hear from you, and, you know, that's, thank you for sharing, you know, and I'd like to hear from,
Yes.
you know, this person over here who hasn't been talking because
Mm-hmm.
they said, you know, whatever. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you say something else about any advice you have about that?
Well, I don't have a lot of experience doing that, but not too long ago I was kind of facilitating like
Yeah.
that. And what came up for me just spontaneously was, as you say, to kind of, first of all, you're aware the person's going on too long, it seems. But also, I was just attentive to other people there and watching their reaction. And I would see certain things that it just seemed to me like they wanted to say something. It wasn't so much necessarily that they covered their mouth. It might have been that they made a fist in their lap, or they moved their arm or something.
Sometimes
But
they might frown or kind of lean forward or something.
I don't even
You
remember
know,
that
sometimes they'll
I
go,
could
like, you know,
that I can describe everything
Yeah.
I saw. But I just kind of noticed people were doing things, and then I would say, "Did you want to say something?" And oftentimes they say, "Yeah, I did."
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
that was interesting. So I was kind of catching on to
Yeah.
watching their
yeah, and back in
body language.
right, when I studied a little bit of stuff again in small group process, I mean, they said that's something they might call that following the energy of the group. You know,
Oh,
just kind of
okay.
like you're just attentive to kind of where the energy's going.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an art. It really is.
It seemed to go pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't effortful for me, but it did require me being attentive.
Yeah. Where I have trouble with doing something like that personally is I want to be liked or something like that, so I don't want to have people dislike me.
Oh,
And yet I sometimes find it difficult to be, to be kind about how I say that, because sometimes I get resentful that they're doing this. Don't you see what you're doing? You know, you're making my job difficult here. Don't you see this? You know? And so,
so that's why you're concerned about not having them dislike you, because you do feel something about it. You have an emotion there. See, in the state I was just describing, I was pretty much emotionless.
Neutral.
I really was neutral. And so it wasn't so much a factor for me. But I can see how if you felt like some annoyance, and then you want to move it on, but you're afraid your annoyance is going to come out.
yeah.
No, they're going to be angry at you
Yeah.
in return. Yeah.
Right,
So so it's really tricky. I think what it's coming back to is sort of practicing and learning how to listen with just a quiet mind. Don't you
Yeah,
think?
and to let go of the ego. I mean, and that part there, if one makes it kind of a competition with yourself or with others to kind of become egoless, then that becomes ego-full, you know,
Yeah.
right, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm so enlightened looking.
Another ability you've
you know,
acquired. Yeah.
so it's almost like the whole thing just requires a person to be kind of a scientist about it, just to be observing without, identifying as like, all I am is this particular body and personality, you know, it's like, instead you're just kind of like letting awareness and observation, intelligence, whatever,
Yeah.
just kind of check the whole thing out, which is kind of what I think we're doing right now, actually. You know, I don't feel competitive with you. Sometimes I do, but I don't right now. But, being honest about that, for example, and that's another trait that makes a very good conversation is honesty. Just saying,
Sure.
look, I'm not perfect. I have these foibles. right?
Yeah, and sometimes I'll say in a situation like that where I feel I would like to say something that's honest, and I don't want to offend them.
Mm-hmm.
I'll sometimes introduce it that way. I'll
Yeah,
say,
right.
"Well, I do have a question. I don't mean it to offend you by asking it if it's okay." And they'll say,
Right.
"All right," and then
Yeah.
I'll go ahead. And it usually works out fine.
Yeah,
You know, they understand I'm coming from a
Right.
place of inquiry, and I'm not really trying to
right.
judge them.
Speaking honestly, you
Mhm.
know, I know some people, you know, along on this subject. I know some people that are really skilled at confrontation, I guess you'd say, or assertiveness, and they have their little formulas for how they do it. Some people, you know, teach it and so on,
Yeah.
and they probably make good managers, you know, and good parents and good all that, you know. But they usually seem kind of fearless about saying things like, "Okay, well, Johnny, you know, when you do that, you know, that's really not acceptable because da 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 da," you know. And so, what I'd like for you to do would be this thing here, you know, and okay. You know, it's like, whereas like, you know, a lot of parents and, you know, probably our parents will say, "Johnny, get out of there, stop doing that," you know, just like give a command, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's a certain skill to like, especially those
I'm
positions
sure,
where
yeah.
you're in charge, you know, like a parent or a manager. You've been kind of the boss of, you know, at the clinic and stuff.
Not too,
You
yeah,
had,
but I
yeah.
didn't have a big group with me. I was just
Yeah.
a few people, and I wasn't too bossy.
Right. Well, I think that helped. I think people appreciated that. We got feedback that you were a good employer. I think because you were just respectful of people.
Yeah, interesting. So it's an important thing. I think it would help a lot in our society if people learned how to listen to each other. So it's important to look at this and to consider it, because you know the more you can communicate, the closer you feel to people, and
Yeah.
the more accepting, and then of course you understand more
Right.
where they're coming from. And
Yeah, and making it safe for people, I think, is important too. You know, it's like sometimes it can really bring people closer together if
Yeah.
someone shares something vulnerable about themselves. you
sure,
know,
sure.
and because we can all relate to that. It takes
Yeah.
some courage to do that and kind of say, "Look, I've had this crap going on in my life," or whatever. You know,
Right.
and yeah, that really does help when people take a chance.
Yeah.
We took a class a long time ago in couple kind of communication.
Oh,
Do you remember
years
anything
ago.
about that? I guess we learned some things from it.
I don't
It was-
remember much, to be honest with you.
One of the things I think was in that class was using I language more than you language. So instead of
okay.
like, "You're so lazy," would you just stop doing that, or what? You know, instead of something like that, you'd say, "I'm really tired and I could use some help."
Oh,
You know,
uh-huh.
I mean, so not to put the blame on someone else, but to just say how you're feeling.
Just share how you're feeling.
And then
Well,
kind of
that
put it
sounds
out.
good. Yeah.
That seems, back to the small group kind of conversation. I think it's important that each person take responsibility for trying to, before they speak or as they speak, to think about, is what I'm saying, you know, moving the conversation forward and being helpful, or am I just at some level kind of showing off and saying, you know, because it's not helpful when somebody says, "Well, you know, I don't particularly have this problem myself, you know, I've conquered
But I
it,
don't
you know,
think that-
I've dealt with it fine, you know."
I don't think people feel like they're showing off, though. I don't think consciously. They just want to express themselves and be heard. And it can be kind of, you know, like you said, egoic, because they're talking about themselves as, look at me, you know,
Well,
I'm this status.
Or it seems like it is
Yeah.
discounting someone who's
Yeah.
struggling with that issue,
Right.
maybe.
Oh, that's not a problem for me. I'm way
Yeah,
past that.
yeah,
Well, but then they're just presenting themselves as superior in a way.
yeah,
But I think, again, that people don't necessarily know that they're doing that.
right. So
Yeah.
it may be coming from some unconscious
Yeah.
need to be, I don't know, approved of or looked up to or
Mm-hmm.
respected or something like that. I don't know. But it's up to each person, I think, really to kind of look at their own style and their own motives in conversations.
Yeah, it comes down to that personal responsibility. You have to, you know, be more attentive to what you're doing and why you're doing it.
And read the cues from the other person.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, are they looking? Yeah. you
Are they
say.
listening?
Are they? Wow. You know, are they really open?
And sometimes it's quite obvious. Again, looking at body language, you know,
Yeah.
I know there can be times when we're all walking around or we're meeting people, and we're talking, and then you can see movements where a person turns slightly or puts one foot out, you know, that means they want to go.
Yeah.
Or I might be doing that.
Yeah.
But that can be ignored. You
Yeah.
just go on and on.
Right.
But you've been giving the signal
Yeah,
that you're ready to go.
You know, it's like, yeah, when people, there are a few people, I'd say it's probably less than 10% of the population that just doesn't seem to pick up those cues.
No.
Or if they do, they're not observing them. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then there's other people that I found that are extremely sensitive, really good listeners, and they really want to hear, and they do active listening. Active listening is where you kind of feedback the person's saying, and but not parroting it, just kind of like
Right.
I hear what you're saying. You're really kind of scared about that, aren't you? Yeah. Empathetic statements, but
Right.
then sometimes they don't necessarily share much about themselves. So sometimes they do, but
Yeah, that's an interesting question in itself. I think it would take interviewing one or two people like that we recognize do that and try to see. They may not know themselves why they do it.
Sometimes in small group situations or in employee situations, maybe teams, that kind of thing, you'll have maybe one or two people that are kind of difficult in that they don't listen well, or they're
Right.
bossy, or they're dominating.
Yeah.
And in our experience as employers, sometimes it just helped tremendously to just fire that person. I mean, it helped the rest of the group's morale.
Yeah.
If you couldn't, it wasn't maybe
Right.
your job, our job, to kind of try to reform that person. So it'd be kind of like maybe in a couple relationship or something like that.
Right.
If you
Same
just,
thing, maybe.
if someone's just abusive or whatever, it means sometimes you just have to get out.
Yeah, might
Yeah.
be. Maybe that's
So-
the best you can do.
Yeah, and to feel okay about it. So, and sometimes a lot of times I think things take care of themselves, kind of by themselves. Then another issue that has come up, and this used to come up, honestly, when we would be visiting your mother, and she would go on and on and on and on and on and on about just gossiping about other people, like people you'd hardly know about, and she'd just keep talking, and people talk that way. They just often will say, and this, da, 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 and this, and there's like never a chance to kind of get a word in edgewise. Okay, so I was talking once with a mentor of mine, Roger Mills, about that, and how it was, how I kind of had trouble dealing with that.
Right.
And he said, conversation isn't really about the content so much as it is about the feeling. So if you just have a feeling that you're connecting with and appreciating that person, just trying to look at them, and look at the person, the soul that's underneath what they're saying, then you can have a much better time. And that's also true like at parties. It used to bother me just the trivial, who are you, how am I, the chat, I'd look around for someone that was kind of more interesting to have a more in-depth conversation with, that kind of thing. So now I more often, I think, tend to just look for the nice feeling, just enjoy maybe the beauty of that person's eyes or something like that, and don't pay that much attention really to what they're saying if what they're saying isn't something that really warrants paying a lot of attention to.
An idea that just came up for me as
Yeah.
you said that was maybe what you're describing, that kind of state of listening, might even change what they're doing.
Yeah, it could.
Maybe they wouldn't go on so long.
Maybe they're just looking for attention, probably most likely they are for
or
love.
maybe
approval.
attention, or maybe we might say connection at a conscious level. That the minds merge because now you're listening fully, and they're expressing, and now that they can sense that you're at one with them, so
Yeah,
to speak, and
right.
then they don't have to keep talking to get your attention
Yeah,
anymore.
right.
It'd be interesting to explore that.
Yeah, and that also I think would apply to little kids that kind of interrupt and kind of like mommy when you're trying to have a conversation. Just like they're, the common understanding of psychology is they're looking for attention.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's kind of, I guess it applies to adults too.
Yeah.
So we're doing a video here, and maybe we talked too long. Maybe
It's time to stop.
maybe we should shut up, and maybe you have some things to say. And thanks for listening. Yeah.